discussing youth entrepreneurship and representation in public policy with our distinguished guest, Manuel Chavez, who was the youngest person to be elected to Costa Mesa City Council. We are committed to bringing you the news, views, and info to go on this special episode of the report, Roundtable Discussion. I'm Jorge Flores.
I'm Tristan Naglunog.
I'm Amanda Mendoza.
And I'm Bri Eastlick. And as you can see, we're continuing to practice social distancing and are going to conduct our episode via Zoom for the foreseeable future. Although we cannot be together in person, we invite you all to continue to be a part of the discussion. Follow us on Twitter at the report CSUF or on our Titan TV Instagram at Titan TV CSUF to keep in touch with us and view our new content. Thank you so much for joining us today, Manuel. Now, can you just go over and introduce yourself, kind of tell us about, your areas of expertise?
Yeah, so thank you for having me again. I'm Manuel Chavez, council member in Costa Mesa District 4. I've been on city council since 2018, when I got elected. So I've been here about 2.5 years. Primarily, my focus on the city council has been a couple things, primarily infrastructure improvements in my district, road improvements, extending park access. We only have 2 parks in my district. We're a pretty park-poor neighborhood. So make sure we have more green space for our community. And lastly, working with public safety, our firefighters, policemen to kind of address the homelessness crisis in Costa Mesa and, get our membership back up in the ranks. Because as we know, unless we have a fully staffed fire and police department, we're not fully safe in the community. So those have been kind of my 3 big things I've been focusing on my time as a council member.
Yeah, speaking about how you wanted to commit yourself to public safety, Manuel, aside from, like you said, local parks and infrastructure, safety is a priority. In terms of the police department, according to police scorecard from 2016 to 2018, I read that Costa Mesa Police Department was ranked 14 out of 100 throughout the whole state. But also in that time span, there have been 53 total civilian complaints of police misconduct, while the rate of civilians being in favor was 1 in 7. And especially in an era right now where trust with the police is kind of at a standstill. There's people who have thoughts of defunding the police or even abolishing the police. How do you assure your community that the police will serve the people despite all these things that we've seen in the media?
Yeah, great question, Tristan. So one of the things I always point out to when it comes to public safety is the history in Costa Mesa, right? So back when I was growing up as a kid, we actually had ICE contracts with the police department in Costa Mesa. So when the cops would show up to a scene, if you were Hispanic, they'll usually ask you like, "Oh, are you a citizen? Are you a resident?" That actually led to a really big decline in calls in my community because people felt unsafe calling the police. Since then, around 2011, 2012, there's been a big push to community policing. In fact, that's kind of been one place where I've had to adapt my persona and realize that as a council member, if I'm advocating to defund the police and if I'm advocating to remove police funding, I'm inherently implying that you can't trust the police. And in my community, a lot of the issues we're facing are because people are afraid to call the police officers, right? They'll hear a loud noise and they'll text me saying, this is going on for the past month. I'm like, hey, call the cops. No, why not? Oh, I'm scared to trust them. Okay, let me walk you through what they're going to ask you. They're going to ask you what's been going on. They're going to ask you what's your name, where you're located. They're not asking these questions to track you. They want to know what's going on in the community, right? And a lot of that has been having a conversation with our police officers. We recently got a new police chief in Brian Glass in Costa Mesa, and he's been very proactive about community engagement. He's been very proactive about getting young members of the community in our high schools into the Explorer program, so they learn what's going on in the police department, because ultimately they're meant to serve us. And if we feel uncomfortable with them, that's just an area where they can improve their stewardship towards us. But ultimately speaking, I think we can improve relationships without defunding the police. Because what I always say is, if there's not any cops available, who are you going to call? And, a lot of times people will point to social workers and whatnot. Well, we employ social workers in our police department. We already have them working with their homeless residents and other folks in Costa Mesa. It's about improving the perception. It's about improving the quality of service. And I think that's how you really make a big difference, because once someone knows they can call the police and feel safe, they're going to do so more often.
And that's very interesting, those kind of topics that you are talking right now. Manuel, I want to transition this interview more to your persona, because something really important about you is that you became the youngest Costa Mesa City Council member in history of this city. So I want you to tell us a little bit more about your path of becoming this youngest Costa Mesa City Council member, but also what does it mean for a Latino to become a youth advocate, but also a political actor in your community?
Yeah, great two-part question there. So let me write that down to youth activist and history. So I got really lucky in Costa Mesa that we went to district elections, right? So there's a big shift in cities in California where there's a population of minorities that aren't being elected to city councils. There's a shift to make voting districts, to make it easier for everyone to be represented in the community, right? You see a lot happening in Garden Grove, you see it happening in Fullerton, it's happening in Costa Mesa. It's been a trend overall in Orange County. And I was a beneficiary of that trend because my neighborhood is the most Hispanic neighborhood in Costa Mesa. It's also the box where I grew up, right? My district were the boundaries where my mom said, hey, don't cross the street growing up as a kid. So for me, the leap to council was a big one, primarily because I was 22 when I announced, a year out of UCI. But it was also somewhat easy because I was walking in a neighborhood I grew up in, right? When I spoke with residents who were older than me, they would ask me like, oh, what are your credentials? And I'll now list them the problems on the street. And they're like, how you know so much? I'm like, I grew up here. I fall on that crack from your house, right? So that level of intimacy made it really easy, or made it easier for me to run and get elected. It was not easy, don't get it twisted, but it made it easier to get elected. In terms of what my voice means to the community, I mean, quite frankly, I mentioned it a bit earlier when I talked about the policing question. Because I'm Latino, I'm from the community, when I speak Spanish, people will talk to me and they'll approach me where they won't approach other council members, right? A lot of the things I've been solving have been issues that could have been solved if someone had known who to go to or felt comfortable going to the community. So in terms of Latino issues, that's kind of what I've known to do, is be a bridge for our community. In terms of youth issues, I mean, hey, just being a young person on the dais is a really big thing, right? When housing comes up, I'm almost always in favor of it unless there's gentrification happening, because I understand the need of like, where am I going to live? Where are my friends going to live? Because they're still in Costa Mesa and they're still in their parents' bedroom and they're only there because there's no apartment for them to rent, right? It's things like that that I'm able to bring a new perspective into by being a young person. And I think the point I want people to take from this is like, if you want to make a difference in your community, sometimes the best way to do is get involved, because just by being somewhat different, just by being a person of color or being a young person, you bring a point of view that may be common to you and your friends, but not common to the entire city or city council or group you're joining.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really well said. Now, I kind of want to piggyback off that. Why do you think it's important for people to get involved with the community and involve themselves with activism and politics, not only on a local level, but also on a national level?
Yeah, great question, Brianna. I think, and my bias is going to show here, I think you have more impact on the local level. And let me explain why with Black Lives Matter, for example, right? So during Black Lives Matter, there was a big movement going on around June, July in the country, right? That was right smack in the middle of every city in California's budget process. If the activists who were in the streets were in the council meetings, I would have had more leverage to do more to address those concerns. I think it's great to have demonstrations that shift public perception, because Black Lives Matter did shift public perception, and it's important to recognize that. But when it comes to making tangible changes, you're going to reach those by going to the sources of power, which is the council meetings, the planning commissions, and joining committees in your local government, right? In Costa Mesa, we actually just took steps to make sure all officers have body cams. I'm sure if we had more people in our council meetings, we could have done a lot more than that. That was what we can get done with the pressure we had. So what I tell people is like, if you want to get involved, there is no point in waiting. I got involved in city politics when I was 18 in UC Irvine. I went to urban council meetings. I went to events in Irvine because I was advocating for issues that are important to me as a UCI student. If you have an issue important to you in your city, go to the council meeting. I guarantee you no one's going to speak. Max people speak is 5 people. So if you speak, that's 1/5 of people that are speaking in public comment, and your voice carries so much weight. And quite frankly, I found this as a young person, people want to get young people involved. If you're a young person in one of these spaces, people are naturally going to say, oh, what are you doing here? Why don't you go speak? You have a good point of view. People want to encourage people who are young. So what I'll say is, if you want to make change, great. Do the protests, do the activism, do what you can, but don't forget the crucial step, which is talking to your people in office who can make the changes.
That's really great advice, Manuel. Or in regards to perception on legislation, so
Mhm.
as a Democrat in a very red county, how do you prove to the city that you want the best for everyone and not just the people in your own party? And do you have any thoughts about the political polarization of the two parties?
Yeah, great question, Amanda. So the good thing about being on city council is that, quite frankly, the political stuff doesn't come up too often because we're primarily fixing like roads, funding our employees and things like that. Occasionally we'll have a partisan vote, but usually they don't come up. And I think the beauty about city council, opposed to like a more like national, like in Congress or Senate or even state legislators, that because there's 7 of us in Costa Mesa, for example, I I can kind of learn my Republican colleagues and see what issues they agree with me on and lean on those to get things done that both of us can agree on. In terms of being a Democrat in Orange County, well, for me, my district is very Democratic. So I'm always willing to compromise and I'm always willing to do what I can to get something passed. But ultimately, I never reflect my district's point of view, which is a more Democratic point of view in general. In terms of being a Democrat in Orange County, I don't really feel as phased because I'm in Costa Mesa, and in Costa Mesa, I have my own constituency. So I'm going to do what's best for my community in Costa Mesa and in my district. And that's kind of how I approach it. If someone wants to dialogue on a more controversial issue, I'll always dialogue and I'll always, do our best, make sure everyone can get consensus to pass something. But ultimately, I don't feel as much of a need to worry about what people are saying about me being Democrat in Orange County. I just say, I represent my district and they elected me for a reason and I'm going to advocate for them.
And I wanted to cycle back into the perspective of serving your community. I've read about the Costa Mesa demographics as predominantly white, but the second is 36% Hispanic, and the marginalized happens to be 8% Asian and 1.85% Black. And I'm sure we've seen how hate crimes towards Asian Americans in specific have skyrocketed in the past recent months, fueled by former President Trump's comments on the pandemic, calling the coronavirus the quote unquote China virus or quote Kung flu. I wanted to ask you, how do you ensure that the marginalized communities of Costa Mesa are safe, and how do you plan to protect and serve these people justice in a time where voice really does matter?
Yeah, I think great question again. I think just being a minority is almost in some ways a really big first step, because I find a lot of people will reach out to me when they would not have reached out to someone who wasn't Hispanic or minority like them. I will say that being a council member, just me being on the council has an influence, and particularly when I speak with our police department and I acknowledge issues where we can improve, it comes from a point of like, hey, like this is my community, right? You mentioned that 36% of Costa Mesa is Hispanic. Well, guess what? They're primarily in my district. So when I'm speaking about issues in my community, they're primarily Hispanic community that's being addressed. In terms of Asian community, it's a little harder because they're not in one set location, right? You can't point in one part of town, like in Garden Grove or Westminster, and say, oh, this is Little Saigon, or this is like an area where there's an enclave of Asian American voters. But I find that like being a minority, I get a lot of outreach from people who are minorities as well. When we make appointments, we're pretty intentional of being diverse. At least I am. In my committee for CDBG grant fundings, I did my best to include young people and people of color, people I knew who historically not had their voices be heard. And I think ultimately, like, these sound like little things, and in some ways they are, but like these little things all add up to making a community where people feel more comfortable speaking to someone else. And alongside that point, I think it's important to recognize that like there's always room for improvement, even for us who are minorities, because like I can always become a better advocate and an ally and supporter of those who feel unheard. And I have a soft spot for those that feel unheard because I felt that way growing up in my community.
Manuel, this is very interesting that you are talking about how you can become an influencer when it comes in politics and in the political spectrum to everyone, including minorities. Now let's go back to that national view. I'm very curious about your perspective about the Biden administration. We have topics as COVID-19, about the social tension we are fearing right now after the Trump's administration. How would you qualify Biden administration up to its first 100 days of government?
Great question, Jorge. I think, in terms of like perception, I think what we're noticing now is like, and we're seeing now is that President Biden is a lot more calm than President Trump. He doesn't do as much press stuff. He's not tweeting. He's not doing these things. And one might argue that that's why he got elected. I feel like Biden's role, honestly, is kind of playing cleanup. It's kind of like bringing back a normalcy in some ways. And when it comes to like the like national like environment, I think that's what he's trying to do, kind of diffuse things and not be really upfront and out there. That's why you don't see him a lot in the news. I mean, you do, but it's not really about Biden. It's about like it's about the vaccines or the stimulus checks. He's not really in the conversation. I think that was kind of his intention. In terms of like, as a city council member, I am really happy for the Biden administration because they're actually passing in the COVID relief to give cities funding. Costa Mesa was really lucky that we have Cycles Plaza, so our budget was not in the red too much. We were just slightly under budget, around $3 million. Don't quote me the number, that could be a bit wrong. I know other cities in Orange County were not as lucky as us. Some city budgets are decimated and they don't have the funds to actually fund their facilities. So Biden being a Democrat who wants to fund localities because he understands that once you fund cities, all you're doing is delaying inevitable and causing bankruptcies down the line. I think that's going to be beneficial for Orange County in the long run. I don't think he's doing the flashy things like Trump did. He's not going out there and being really bold on policy, and that might upset some people who are progressive, who want more bold action. But in terms of like day-to-day functionality, he's doing a lot for the community and making sure that we have funding to maintain the city budget and make sure we have city employees who are going to do, who will like be in the parks, make sure kids are safe, who will be doing the planning checks for when we do buildings, who keep us safe by having our firefighters fully staffed. I think that goes a long way. So I'm cautiously optimistic for Biden. I think will be a lot more of like calmness, and I think hopefully we'll address some more issues that are more bipartisan and just more like day-to-day stuff.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Now, I kind of want to shift gears for my next question and move to the COVID-19 virus. Now, obviously, COVID-19 has really impacted the world very drastically, and especially people of color who have been hit very hard by the virus. I kind of want to hear your thoughts on what the response Costa Mesa and the state of California, for that matter, has made. How do you think that they've done combating the virus and helping those mostly affected?
Yeah, great question. I'm going to add the county in that as the third level, because I think the county is really the piece that people forget about, because citywide, there's not much we can do apart from addressing concerns, right? So in Costa Mesa, we passed a mask mandate saying wear a mask or $10 fine. That was primarily for businesses to ensure our residents were safe when they go to businesses, right? We passed an eviction moratorium on evictions. So if you lost your job, you couldn't be evicted until this is over. And the plan is that we don't make more people who are homeless during the crisis. We don't have access to the vaccines. That comes from the state and the county and the federal government. So we are still limited on what we can do to actually resolve the crisis. The best we can do is just pass legislation to hopefully encourage people to stay home and not go out as much. And I forgot to mention, but we actually stopped parking citations for permit streets to keep people home and not have to worry about moving their cars at all. Statewide, I feel like the lockdowns were their thing. I wish they would have been more set in stone on their ideas, because I feel like it was really hard for a council to justify our actions when the governor kept changing how he measured COVID. I think around September, November, October, they finally got a metric that worked, the 4-tier system. And we've been going off of that. And based off of that, we should be going to the red tier, which will allow us to open up more of our city. I wish he had that sooner. I understand he probably couldn't because the science was always evolving and changing, but that would have been helpful for us to address that. And then countywide, I feel like they failed us the most. And I'll just be very blunt here, because they were the ones that got the money from the federal government to administer the vaccines and to make sure we were safe, right? They were the ones who had the time to set the pods and get people vaccinated. And I know for a fact, given my ties to the county and other groups, the county didn't have a plan until the vaccines arrived. The vaccines were here before they had a plan in place. And I think, to me, that's one of those things where it's like, as government, your job is to be efficient with taxpayer money. Your job is to not waste it and flounder it. And when we had COVID vaccines in place, we should have had a plan already in place. We shouldn't have been making a plan, right? We shouldn't still be fighting in County of Orange to do a drive-up test site in the OC Fairgrounds. It should have already been done, right? We shouldn't have been fighting to get SoCA up and running It should have been in the plans. Like, and that's been my biggest frustration with the county is like, you have the money to do what you had to do. And because you weren't acting, we had to go to the governor's office directly and petition for bills. We had to go through our networks to lobby to have our seniors back in Costa Mesa. And we got it done. But I just had to wish they would have done more of a structure going in, because ultimately, like, they were the facilitators, right? The county, the city is the one that gets the benefit to the community. The state imposes the law. The federal government gives you the money.
Lastly, in regards to you being the youngest member of the Costa Mesa City Council, obviously many people look up to, whether it be college students or high school students. So do you have any advice for these people who might want to pursue a career in public service? And also, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, like, if you want to get involved in public service, just get started. I am at where I'm at today. I got like 23 years old. I got looked at 23 because people in party politics and people in my city knew me, because they're like, oh, I don't know for 5 years since he was 18. I've seen him do the work. I trust him even though he's young. Like, if you want to get involved in politics, like, just jump in, find someone to intern for, find a campaign you want to get involved with and join the campaign. Because when they make appointments for city council, when they make hirings in their office for state legislator, they're gonna hire people they know, because they know, oh, they have good work ethic. I worked them on this issue before in the campaign. I know they're gonna be great. If you want to have a voice, you gotta get involved. And I think the thing to remember, and this is something that I was taught when I was really young, is that people in public office are no different than you or I. They eat like us, they talk like us, they sleep like us. They're not different. They're just in a role. So if you can demystify that self and just say they're a person I can talk to, that makes it so much easier to get involved. And finally, the thing I want to end with is really this: like, as a young cohort of like young millennials and Gen Z, right? You know, we have a way different way of thinking than our parents and our grandparents. And I don't even mean like left, right, Republican, Democrat. I mean like just internal human values that we share that are unique to us. And if we want to see change to address climate change, if we want to see change on how we address big business or government, we have to get involved and make our voices be heard. Because until we do so, we're going to be at the whims of those who are in charge, who are our forefathers, and they may not have the same ideas that we have. So just get involved and get engaged. That's what I was saying.
Well, thank you so much for coming here today, Manuel Chavez. And with that, that's all the time we have today on the Report Roundtable Discussion. Have a safe weekend, everyone, and stay tuned for more news, views, and info. And one last big thank you to Manuel Chavez for joining us today. I'm Amanda Mendoza.
I'm Jorge Flores.
Kristen Maglino.
And I'm Bree Eastlick. And as always, stay fresh, Fullerton.